If this was Twitch, I'd be banned by now. Fun fact, it was a deliberate choice that the word Simps appears on screen before the rest of the letters. They didn't mean today's meaning of the word, but rather simp as a short form of the word simpleton. The first episode of The Simpsons, called Simpsons Roasting on an Open Fire, first aired on the 17th of December 1989. But The Simpsons had been around for longer than that. It all started when producer James L. Brooks, who was working on The Tracy Ullman Show, asked cartoonist Matt Groening to pitch a series of short cartoons that would air on the show. He originally intended to pitch a series of comic strips called Life in Hell, but he realized he'd have to rescind the publication rights for his cartoon. Within minutes before his meeting with Brooks, he instead created the dysfunctional family we know and love, and named them after his own family, his parents Homer and Marge, and his little sisters Lisa and Maggie. The name Bart was apparently an anagram of the word brat. The first of the Simpsons shorts aired on the 19th of April 1987. Groening imagined the animators at Klasky Csupo would clean up his rough character sketches, which they did not, which is why the Simpsons shorts look very different from the TV show. Dan Castellaneta and Julie Kavner, the voices of Homer and Marge, were not cast for their roles, but simply chosen because they already were cast members of The Tracy Ullman Show. Nancy Cartwright, the voice of Bart, originally auditioned for Lisa, a role that in the end went to Yardley Smith. In 1989, The Simpsons were to be adapted into a full half-hour program on the newly established Fox channel, and Brooks worked out a deal with the network executives that granted The Simpsons writers full creative freedom over their work, and prevented Fox from interfering with the show's content. James L. Brooks, Matt Groening, and Sam Simon developed the show from the short cartoons about the family into a fully fleshed out half-hour program, and Sam Simon is some of the original writing staff that wrote the 13 episodes that would then air from December 1989 to May of 1990. The goal was to create a show that the writers would personally like to watch, an alternative to the mainstream trash according to Groening, but they expected to be taken off the air after weeks. Instead, The Simpsons became a worldwide success. It is now the longest running US-American animated series and the longest running US-American scripted primetime television series. It has recently reached its 700th episode, and it was renewed until season 34, when it will reach its 757th episode. The show has spawned a feature film in 2007 with a sequel in the works, video games, comic books, merchandise, you name it. I've recently watched a YouTube video by LS Mark that reviewed every episode of the show until that point, and guess what? It's already outdated. This has in parts inspired me to start a similar project, except I look at each season individually and try to review every episode more in depth. I've got no idea how far I'll get and how long this will take me. Maybe I'll stop after 3 seasons, maybe 10 years from now I'll review season 40, who knows. For now, let's just focus on season 1. And what a strange season it is. It's not as refined or developed yet, the animation looks really weird in places, but it has a ton of charm. It is incredibly unique and funny, and is an absolute classic. But before we jump to a conclusion, let's look at each episode individually, starting with Simpsons Roasting on an Open Fire, written by Mimi Pond, directed by David Silverman, original air date December 17th, 1989. Bart gets a tattoo, and Marge spends all of the Simpsons' Christmas money to have it surgically removed. In the meantime, Mr. Burns cuts Homer's Christmas bonus, and he is too embarrassed to tell his family. Because he doesn't want them to miss out on Christmas, he accepts a part-time job as Santa in the mall, which turns out to be a scam as he's only paid $13. His last resort is to visit Springfield Downs, where him and Bart put all of their money on a dog called Santa's Little Helper, who ends up finishing in last place. His owner throws him out, Homer and Bart adopt him, and he turns out to be the greatest Christmas gift of all time. This episode is, obviously, one of the all-time classics, and I usually watch it every year around holiday season. It's honestly one of the best Christmas episodes in the entire show, of which there aren't actually as many as you might think. And I feel like it evokes the spirit of Christmas better than any other one. What I love about Simpsons Roasting on an Open Fire is how Homer acts. He is not the straight-up horrible person he is today. Instead, he is a caring father who loves his family more than anything else. So much in fact that he hides him not having received a bonus, tries to do the Christmas shopping on a limited budget, eventually accepts a degrading part-time job, and goes out late at night to find a cheap Christmas tree just so that the Simpsons can celebrate Christmas like any other family. Even when all hope is lost, he does not lose his spirit and hopes for a miracle until the very end. I adore the scene where a kid lists all of his ridiculous wishes, and Homer tells him that he's already got all a kid can ask for: a loving family, a caring father who would do anything for him. The scene where Homer confronts Bart with the truth, and the ending when Homer finally reveals what he's been hiding. Bart introduces Santa's little helper, and Lisa and Marge are overwhelmed with joy and love for Homer. This is what makes The Simpsons so great. It's everyday stories about a normal family that could happen to you and me. Relatable plots and moments that just feel real. It is made for us to laugh at, but it is not a show about joke characters. These are characters that act and think and feel like real people. That's what set The Simpsons apart from anything else on television and guaranteed its everlasting success. Until then, television animation was strictly aimed at children, while sitcoms for adults felt artificial. This, however, is an animated show for adults that is both hilarious and over the top, but also realistic and relatable. And you have all of that in Simpsons Roasting on an Open Fire, which I think works perfectly as the show's pilot. It introduces the most important characters and how they interact with each other. It has some funny and very memorable moments and a very sweet ending. Granted, it's not the funniest episode by far, but there are some great moments in here, like the Santa training with the hypnotist, Bart's Batman-themed version of Jingle Bells, Rod, or is it Todd, I can't keep them apart, handing Homer his pork chops, the short interaction between Bart and the tattooer, and how could I forget, the best scene in the episode, when Homer finally realizes that Santa's little helper is a Simpson. I also love how much Lisa is invested in the Happy Little Elves cartoon. In the same scene you can see how mature and thoughtful she is, but in the end, even though she's by far the smartest person in the family, she's also just an 8-year-old girl who enjoys horribly animated cartoons for children and asks for a pony for Christmas. From today's perspective, the episode does seem a bit dated because of how it looks. The drawings aren't as clean yet, there are some weird background characters that look awfully similar to members of the Simpson family, which is a taboo. Some of the locations are significantly different, like Moe's Tavern for example. The voices feel a bit off, and some characters are very different from how we know them. Ralph is not the idiot he became later, but just some random kid from elementary school who tells the kid's parents about Knecht Ruprecht and Christmas in Germany. Flanders isn't the practicing Christian he turned into later, but simply the Simpsons' neighbor who's kind of a dork and a poser, who's got it a lot better in life, and whose purpose it is to constantly remind Homer of that very fact. I really like Simpsons Roasting on an Open Fire. It's incredibly sweet and funny enough, and I'm very glad it became the pilot instead of Some Enchanted Evening, which was originally meant to be the first episode. The original writing staff wanted to create a show that they would enjoy, the likes of which had never before seen on television, but they expected it to be off the air after 6 weeks or so, and certainly never expected it to become such a world sensation. This single episode blew everyone's minds and single-handedly created an undescribable hype for The Simpsons, with both critics and viewers alike being ecstatic about this yellow family. Even if you're skeptical watching it the first time, once Homer says the dog's a Simpson, you will realize that this show is something truly special. Bart the Genius, written by John Vitti, directed by David Silverman, original air date January 14th, 1990. Bart cheats on an IQ test by replacing his with Martin's and is shortly after diagnosed to be a genius with an IQ of 216. Principal Skinner then sends him to a school for highly gifted children where he feels lost until he eventually confesses that he cheated. This episode is a great showcase of Bart who, even though he hates class and tests, feels right at home at Springfield Elementary School where he can see his friends and prank his teachers. The school he is sent to sounds like a dream to him. Make your own rules, you can do whatever you want whenever you feel like it, there are no tests and exams and grades, but once he's there, he's overwhelmed by both the teacher and his fellow students, who immediately realize that he's not the brightest kid and bully him. At his new school, Bart feels terrible, in fact probably worse than ever before, and starts to miss his old school. To make it even worse, his old friends, such as Blackhair Milhouse, do not accept him anymore now that he's supposedly better than them. This is really sad actually, to think that normal children like Bart and Milhouse are forced to go to traditional class, while a better school system is clearly possible and exists for those who are more privileged. The smart kids at the new school are incredibly mean and disrespectful, while Bart's peers at Springfield Elementary had always welcomed him, but suddenly do not like him anymore only because some adults label Bart as gifted and allow him to pursue an education they could only dream of. Being considered a genius, the bond between Bart and his father grows even stronger. Similarly to the first episode, we can see a Homer that truly cares about his son and supports him in any way, shape or form. Probably better than Marge actually, who suddenly buys him tickets to highly sophisticated operas and film festivals, while Homer wants Bart to pursue what he likes to do, such as reading comic books. I especially love the scene where they play baseball in the backyard and truly have a great time. So great in fact that Bart doesn't do what he intended to do, which was confess the truth, simply because he knows that Homer cares so much for him because of how gifted he apparently is. Of course, once he does confess, everything goes back to normal. While episode 1 did have some funny moments here and there, Bart the Genius is outright hilarious. It starts with the super iconic Scrabble game where Bart invents the word Quitshibo, and once asked to define it, he starts to describe an animal oddly similar to Homer, and Marge even joins in. There's the joke about Homer's handwriting, the fact that Skinner has an entire shelf filled with Bart's records, and the graffiti that Bart is detained for, that Homer laughs at and that is later showcased as an artwork by Bart Simpson IQ 216. This episode also has some truly fantastic animation. I've got to give a special shoutouts to the scene where Bart tries to visualize the train problem from the IQ test, which is beautifully surreal. Other little bits of animation I love are the faces Bart and Martin make when they look at each other, Martin's little head nod when Mrs. Krabappel says that some kids might actually do well on the test, Bart shuddering when he writes the word am in his confession, and Homer knocking on Bart's door in the end. This episode is both incredibly funny and also pretty emotional at the same time. Watching it makes me realize just how much I miss these characters, or rather these versions of the characters. In the later episode, where there is no noticeable personal connection between any of the characters, where no one cares about anything or anyone, it's a great episode. I like it slightly better than Simpsons roasting on an open fire. Homer's Odyssey, written by Jay Kogan and Wallace Wolodarski, directed by Wes Archer, original air date January 21st, 1990. I'm honestly surprised it took them so long to come up with this episode title. During Bart's field trip to the power plant, Homer causes an accident and is subsequently fired. He tries his best to find a new job and falls into depression, tries to cope with alcohol, and ultimately decides to kill himself. After he's almost run over by several cars as he tries to kill himself, he realizes how dangerous the intersection is and finds new purpose in advocating for public safety. Ultimately, he fights against the power plant and is then offered by Mr. Burns to return working at the plant as a safety inspector. Homer eventually accepts the job and we're back to status quo. Homer's Odyssey might be one of the darkest episodes in the history of the show, besides trios of horror episodes that is. Remember when I said that the Simpsons used to act like real people? Yeah, throughout the show, Homer has had all sorts of ridiculous jobs without any explanation to what happened to his normal job. But when he lost his work for the first time ever, he was devastated. He tries his best to find a new job to care for his family, and after dozens of rejections, he's a train wreck who lies on the couch all day, doesn't reply when spoken to, watches TV late at night, searches the entire house for enough pennies to buy a beer, and then decides that his family would be better off without him. Of course, I roughly remembered this episode before watching it again for this review, but I did not remember the contents of his goodbye letter that he writes all teared up. It was really shocking and I was not ready for it. It's certainly one of the darkest and most emotional moments in the entire series, and I applaud it. I already said how much I like the characters in season 1, and this is another example for why I do. If a family member tried to kill themselves in a modern episode, another one would stand right next to them and encourage them to do it. And by the way, this is not a joke, that actually happens in a later episode. Although I enjoy the first half of the episode, it drops a bit in quality once Homer becomes this fighter for stop and watch out signs who, for whatever reason, gets quite a big following. Of course the ending is predictable, but it makes sense. Everything has to go back to normal in the end, and it's decently executed. I do really enjoy Homer's dilemma, where he has to decide whether he wants to stay true to his principles or take Mr. Burns' job, and now he refuses to announce to his fans that the power plant is indeed safe. The episode is not nearly as funny as its predecessor, but it has some great moments, like the elderly couple who's amused of the fact that young Simpson finally decided to kill himself. Homer yelling, "Hey you idiot, watch where you're going," at a car that almost ran him over as he was about to jump off of a bridge tied to a heavy rock, and the TV program for the unemployed broadcasting tips on how to win the lottery and ads for beer. This episode also features an educational video on what nuclear power is and why it's perfectly safe, which is another highlight of the episode. Watching it again, I immediately expected Troy MacLeod to show up, but he won't actually appear until season 2's Homer vs. Lisa and the Eighth Commandment. Instead, we get an on-purpose horribly animated cartoon that is stylized to look extra old, and that should hopefully answer all questions you might have for nuclear power. Homer's Odyssey also features blacksmithers, a tire yard that is not yet on fire, and some other animation goofs I noticed, like this one shot where Sherry, or is it Terry, doesn't have a body. Another thing I noticed is the frequent use of close-up shots that feel out of place. This is apparent in all episodes in this season, but I specifically wrote it down in my notes while I was watching this episode, because especially the beginning was filled with them. I'm only 3 episodes in, which means I'm still at a point where I can compare everything I've reviewed so far, and I want to say that Homer's Odyssey is a good episode, but it is not as wholesome as Simpsons Roasting on an Open Fire, and not as funny as Bart the Genius. It's the weakest one so far. Again, we're only 3 episodes in, so this doesn't mean anything. I definitely recommend it, let alone for the very touching scene where Homer writes his goodbye letter. There's No Disgrace Like Home, written by Al Jean and Mike Reiss, directed by Greg Vanzo and Kent Butterworth, original air date January 28, 1990. Homer's family embarrasses him at Mr. Burns' annual picnic, which is why he develops serious concerns that his family is not normal, which he then tries to change. Eventually he signs his family up for Dr. Marvin Monroe's family therapy, which goes horribly wrong, and the Simpsons receive double their money back, which strengthens their bond again and settles their disputes. The episode starts off with a great gag that I completely forgot and took me by surprise, where Lisa and Bart argue over who loves Homer more, which she is deeply touched by, only to then find out that his children accuse each other of loving him more. At Mr. Burns' picnic, we see Bart and Lisa go nuts, or rather, act like the children they are, which is expected of Bart, but from later episodes we know Lisa as a very mature girl who is, very introspective, quiet, and disconnected from her peers, who spends her time reading, going to the museum, playing the saxophone, and really isn't into this childlike behavior she often calls out Bart for. But I really enjoy this dynamic between the two siblings, and Lisa not acting too maturely for her age. We also see Marge acting out of character in what's the first time in the show that she drinks, and as you may know, when Marge drinks, she drinks a lot. What follows is a scene with some fantastic animation where she's completely drunk and sings with all the other women dancing in the background. Speaking of animation, there's this incredible scene where the Simpsons leave Burns Manor and Homer envisions his family as a bunch of little devils going to hell, while other seemingly perfect families are on their way to heaven. It's wonderfully surreal, imaginative, and over the top, and of course beautifully animated. I also love the animation of the Simpsons stuffing their mouths with food, especially the still frame where they stop eating because Homer interrupts them. Another joke I like is how quickly and easily Homer convinces Marge to spend the children's college money, and how little it is. I also chuckled at the scene where Marvin Monroe asks them to let out their anger in a drawing, and all Simpsons quickly draw Homer, while Homer himself is especially passionate as he's drawing, only to reveal that he hadn't been paying any attention at all. Maggie hitting Homer with his stick is also another one of my favorite parts of this episode, and the shock therapy is one of the most iconic scenes from the entire season. It's comedy gold, perfectly executed, with great timing and hilarious animation. This episode's message is quite simple. The Simpsons are a dysfunctional family, but as is said in the episode, they are just like any other one. They might be very chaotic, they might argue a lot, but deep down, they love each other. What Homer didn't realize is that at the picnic, he simply couldn't see what the other families are going through. The ending to this episode is really sweet. The family therapy itself failed miserably, but still worked out in the end. They get double their money back and celebrate their victory together, and Homer finally makes peace with his family and decides to buy a fancy new TV after having given the old one to a pawnbroker in order to afford the therapy. There's No Disgrace Like Home might seem a bit cliché, but we are at a point in the series where clichés like this haven't been done 50 times already, so I'll let it slide. It has some fantastic and also hilarious animation that I can't give it enough credit for, and the therapy scene alone is what makes it an all-time classic. I'll rank it slightly below Simpsons Roasting on an Open Fire. Bart the General, written by John Swartzwell, directed by David Silverman, original air date February 4th, 1990. Because Bart defends Lisa from a friend of Nelson's, the bully starts to beat him up every day after school. After seeking some horrible advice from his father, he eventually resorts to Grandpa, who introduces him to military antique salesman Herman, who makes Bart build an army and go to war against Nelson. The episode starts with Bart fighting with Lisa over some cupcakes she's made for Miss Hoover, but it's great to see how this is just a typical childish fight between siblings, as Bart immediately stands up for his sister as soon as one of Nelson's friends steals and destroys the bag with cupcakes. He Here we have Bart defending Lisa against an opponent he stands no chance against just because she's his sister, which is heartwarming to see. I also forgot how down Bart is after he gets beaten up. Normally he's the cool and popular kid, but here he's the victim who feels defeated and looks like he's about to cry. Gosh, I just love how real the characters feel in this season. I cannot repeat this enough. Bart's parents give him very different advice. Marge gives the good one, except she's a bit naive to believe that Bart and Nelson would just talk it out. Homer, on the other hand, teaches Bart the code of the schoolyard, or whatever it's called, and encourages him to fight dirtily, which Bart fails miserably at and instantly regrets it. Now, Herman is an incredible character. He might actually be the most insane person in all of Springfield. Herman is a war-loving maniac who sells all sorts of military relics, from real Nazi underwear to actual declarations of war. The idea of declaring war against a 10-year-old enlightens a fire in him, and he takes the entire thing way too seriously and makes Bart do things he never intended to do. The act break is great. Herman is busy writing a declaration of war, while Bart gulps and stares in shock, realizing what he's just done. Sure, he wanted to teach Nelson a lesson, but he never wanted to go this far, which I really like. He wants justice, he wants to get along with Nelson and not beat him to the ground. And there's some good commentary on bullies, as Nelson's buddies quickly switch sides as soon as they're overrun by Bart's army. The ending shows that Bart and Nelson are very aware of the fact that they are playing war, and we come full circle with all of them eating cupcakes in peace. Not only are the characters incredibly well written, but the episode is also really funny. It starts with Homer's talk on how to be successful while completely ignoring Lisa's comments. Then we have Skinner ignoring Nelson's threats and only caring about Bart making it to class in time. Bart's line, "I'm not saying I'm not a hero," while also explaining he won't stand a chance against Nelson. Homer appearing in Bart's thoughts while he tries to fight, which is one of my personal favorite moments from the episode. All of the men in the retirement castle looking up in excitement once Bart says he wants to meet Grandpa. And how could I forget the incredibly iconic scene where Grandpa writes his complaint letter to a television station, which is even funnier because he complains about the term family jewels, which Homer just mentioned to Bart a few minutes prior. There's this montage where Bart trains his army, which is a reference to something that I don't know to what, but hey, it's also been done in the Eddsworld episode Moving Targets, that's where I know it from. Another bit I want to give credit for is the end where Bart addresses the viewers to tell them that wars have no winners and that there are no good wars, except for the ones he then goes on to list. And I've heard if I wanted to learn more about them, some books in the library have some really gory pictures. What a wonderful message to end the episode on, and it's very much in the spirit of the show. One final thing I want to address is that just like its predecessor, this episode has two fantastic dream sequences. Bart's nightmare where he runs from Nelson, which is perfectly surreal, and it expresses his fears beautifully, and his daydream where he pictures his own funeral, which is both haunting and funny at the same time. Bart the General is a truly great episode. It shows Bart in a way we rarely see him in, where he's nothing but a vulnerable little kid afraid of a bully, something that a lot of people will be able to relate to themselves, and we get a deep look into Bart's moral compass, where he wants to win against Nelson, though not really this way, and is persuaded to do so nonetheless. Herman makes this episode stand out. He's both hilarious and also one of the most frightening characters I've ever seen on the show. I'm very glad he appears so rarely, so that we can have episodes like this one that allow him to stand out. I also enjoy Grandpa in this episode, who might not be as insane as Herman, but does think very much like him and enjoys this little game of war way too much as well. The episode is hilarious, has tons of very quotable scenes. Grandpa's letter is only one of them, and in the nightmare scene, the animation truly shines. This episode is very high on my list so far. I'll put it just below Bart the Genius. Moaning Lisa, written by Al Jean and Mike Reiss, directed by Wes Archer, original air date February 11th, 1990. In one of the very first plot ideas the team has had, Lisa is sad, consumed with existentialist thoughts and worry. After meeting a jazz musician called Bleeding Gums Murphy, she eventually finds her salvation in expression through music. In the B story, Bart and Homer play a wrestling video game and Homer tries to get good enough to beat his son. This episode stands out from the rest as it is not strictly humorous, but instead a very emotional episode focused on Lisa's inner struggles. As you may or may not know, Lisa is actually my favorite character from the show. She's the only person in Springfield who's neither an idiot nor batshit crazy. She is very intellectual and sophisticated, and struggles to live among people who do not understand her and do not try to understand her. She is not interested in sports, childish games and fights, and whatever her peers talk about. Being extremely introverted and disconnected from the kids her age, she is very lonely and struggles to make friends. Since neither her parents nor any other adult tried to listen to what she says, thinks, and feels, and instead decide to ignore her, or maybe even laugh at the apparently ridiculous things that come out of her mouth, Lisa has no choice but to stay misunderstood, alone, and sad. No one in town values the things she's interested in, she has no one to talk to, nowhere to be herself. I always found her very relatable, and I'm a big fan of the Lisa episodes in general, this being no different. I love with how much respect Lisa is treated here, and how very real and touching every single scene is. It starts with the scene where Marge has only got 2 cupcakes for 3 people, and Lisa immediately forfeits hers because she is uninterested and indifferent towards everything. The original idea James L. Brooks had was to make an episode where Lisa is sad but does not know why. This episode is just that, and it is executed masterfully in every single regard. As says the letter Marge and Homer receive from her school, Lisa refuses to play dodgeball because she is sad. That scene alone is great, and just like a lot of people both in Springfield and in the real world would do, her PE teacher shows no sympathy, denies the idea of being too sad to play dodgeball, and all the other kids laugh at her. Then there's the scene where Homer is annoyed by her saxophone player and tells her to stop, and Lisa breaks out in tears but agrees to simply work on her technique in silence. Homer quickly understands he shouldn't have said that, but Lisa does not change her mind. This scene is truly heartbreaking, and it is not the only time in the episode that Lisa does whatever she's told because she doesn't want to disappoint others, or maybe doesn't have the power to argue or fight back. In another scene, Marge tells her to smile and to pretend everything's okay. It's what her mother has always told her, and it's how you get people to like and appreciate you, which Lisa doesn't comment on. She simply puts on a fake smile and says yes to whatever is said to her, and several boys immediately take an interest in her. This makes Marge furious, she apologizes, tells her to just be herself, and whenever she feels sad, she'll do the smiling for the 2 of them. Lisa then breaks out in joy and relief, makes peace with her mother, and starts to legitimately smile because she feels like it. This also makes me appreciate Marge a lot more, who's a character I usually don't care too much about. A very sweet ending to a beautiful episode. Bleeding Gums is a fantastic character, even though his role in this episode isn't too big. Remember when I said no one in town can connect with Lisa? That's not exactly true, there's one. Bleeding Gums is some kind of a role model and mentor for Lisa, and he helps her let out all of her worries and struggles through music. He doesn't yell at her to stop making noise like her father does, he supports and encourages her, and even plays the song she's written in front of a live audience. Bleeding Gums Murphy is someone Lisa desperately needed to escape the hell she lives in, to allow her to be true to herself, who deeply understands her and can relate to her on every single level. In comparison to the main story, the B story is a little more on the forgettable side, though I really like it. I love the competitive drive Homer feels, who simply wants to beat this toxic little kid in a silly video game. The game itself is amazing, I love the pixelated style, the animations are hilarious and way ahead of what video games actually looked like in 1990. The fatalities remind me a lot of Mortal Kombat, which wasn't even a thing by the time this episode aired. The referee is also a great reference to Matt Groening's comic strip Life in Hell. The subplot is ended in a way that's very much in the nature of the show. Homer is finally successful, beats Bart solidly, but just before the game ends, Marge unplugs the console and Bart declares his retirement from the game. The episode's animation isn't as jaw-dropping as that of some of the previous episodes, but there are some sequences in here I find memorable or that even touched me. I love Marge's and Homer's dreams. Marge dreams of her traumatic experiences with her own mother who told her to always pretend to be happy no matter what, which made me really sad because this is what Marge then proceeds to tell her own daughter without reflecting on it. She probably always believed this in her entire life so far, but fortunately she makes up her mind in the end. Homer dreams he's in the wrestling game where he gets beaten up by Bart, which makes him wake up in fear and yell for like 5 seconds and then fall asleep again. My favorite shot from the episode is this beautiful one where Lisa and Bleeding Gums jam together on a bridge in front of the shining moon. Moaning Lisa doesn't shine too much in the joke department, though there are some funny moments in here. I love Homer's quick mood changes in the beginning. He knocks angrily at the bathroom door and commands Lisa to get out, then laughs loudly at his own joke, then immediately reverts back to the angry knocking. In the scene that follows, he searches the house for his car keys and gets angry at Bart who's taunting him, only to switch from anger to joyful hope whenever he gets a new idea where his keys could be. The most memorable joke from the episode is a scene where Lisa and Bart argue over who of them Maggie likes more, and ask her to choose one of them. This is dragged out to be very long, but not too long. Although the ending might be a little predictable, Maggie chooses neither of them but the TV instead. It has hilarious acting, timing, simply an amazing build-up to a very unsatisfying conclusion. Moaning Lisa is not nearly as funny as the other episodes in the season so far. It doesn't have as much avant-garde or imaginative animation going for it as its predecessors, but in case you haven't realized it already, this is my favorite episode so far, and there's only one other episode left in the season that I can think of that can possibly beat this one for me. I wouldn't be surprised if this episode ended up among my highest ranked episodes from the entire show. I recommend this episode to everyone. If you haven't seen it before, definitely consider giving it a watch. The Call of the Simpsons, written by John Swartzwelder, directed by Wes Archer, original air date February 18th, 1990. Homer is jealous of Flanders' new caravan, thus the Simpsons go out to buy one of their own. On their very first trip, their caravan falls off of a cliff and the family gets stranded in the wilderness. While Marge and Lisa build a shelter, Homer and Bart try to find help, and Maggie gets adopted by a family of bears. Eventually, a filmmaker catches Homer on camera and believes he is Bigfoot. Bigfoot's apparent discovery makes front page news, and soon hundreds of people try to be the first to catch him. I like how in the beginning, Homer tells Bart to not compare himself to the Flanders, and then immediately does so himself once Ned introduces him to his new caravan. Because there is no way Flanders can be better than him, Homer realizes he has to have a caravan himself, and wants to buy the best one there is. I really like the scene at Bob's RV roundup. It's probably the best part of the episode. Cowboy Bob is a great character, the first of many in the show voiced by Albert Brooks, who was only credited as A. Brooks because he was unsure whether he would want to be associated with the cartoon show. I like how he's a caricature of a typical salesman who pretends to be their customer's friend. Heck, even the sign at the entrance says a happy customer is more important than profits. Bob pretends to really like Homer and constantly compliments him. Even when he finds out Homer will never be able to pay for any of his RVs, his character doesn't change, and he acts as nicely as always. When he tries to make Homer rent his train wreck of an RV instead, he manipulates him into making decisions without asking his family first. I also really enjoy how Flanders congratulates Homer on his newest acquisition and is genuinely happy for him, without realizing Homer only bought it to make him jealous. After that, the episode goes down in quality, though it remains entertaining and solidly funny. There's no joke in this episode that made me laugh out loud, but I did at least chuckle regularly while watching it. The better moments include Bart and Lisa playing What's That Smell in the car, Homer's "pfft, maps" comment, Homer saying a lot of people would give everything to be in their situation, and Bart reminding him that they just did, the "Look Maggie, birdies" joke, the scene where Homer argues with his own echo, and some others. The only moment from this episode that I remembered before watching it again for the sake of this review was the scene where Homer builds a trap and the bunny that walks into it gets launched into the distance. When I was a kid, I thought this was hilarious, but I presume it's one of those jokes that only work the first time you watch it. Some of my favorite scenes from this episode include Maggie, who gets adopted by a family of bears who really care for her and even steal toys and pacifiers from other campers' babies. Maggie is one of my favorite characters in the show, and I wish we could see more scenes like this. This episode also has a scene where Lisa and Marge bond a little in their camp and both agree that Homer and Bart are most likely okay. I like how every member of the family is doing well, except Homer and Bart, who are said to be survival experts and experienced woodsmen. The last act of the episode contains some excellent commentary on sensationalist media. When this episode first aired, Fox was flooded with Bigfoot documentaries and coverage, and this episode is a satire on that. But I think you can interpret it beyond that. My favorite little bit is probably that the TV station stopped airing the president's address to make room for Bigfoot coverage, but it makes sense considering I can't imagine George H.W. Bush has anything more interesting to say. The series of articles on Bigfoot's wife and his preferred food according to his wife is some excellent satire as well. I'm not a big fan of the ending. Several scientists examine Homer and come to different conclusions as to whether he's human or not. Though I can imagine tabloids and TV channels using the story to make a cheap buck, the scientists should find out he's clearly human, but maybe this is supposed to be a joke about how disgusting and animalistic Homer is, but I don't think it works very well. The Call of the Simpsons has some great backgrounds and locations with a lot of attention to detail and love put into them. It's the first time in the history of the show we see the Simpsons outside of Springfield, and the episode deserves to take credit for that since it's done especially well. It is solidly funny all throughout. Bob's RV roundup and Maggie and the Bears are the highlights, but I'm not a big fan of Homer being mistaken for Bigfoot. It's a decent episode, but most likely my least favorite so far. The Telltale Head, written by Al Jean, Mike Reiss, Sam Simon, and Matt Groening, directed by Rich Moore. Original air date February 25th, 1990. Bart starts to hang out with Jimbo, Kearney, and Dolph, and joins them as they sneak into a cinema and steal at the Quickie Mart. The rowdies then throw stones at the statue of Jebediah Springfield, the founder of Springfield, and talk about how cool it would be if someone sawed his head off. Because he wants the rowdies to like him, Bart decides to do it after seeking advice from his father. The news of the statue being decapitated shocks the entire town, including the rowdies Bart wanted to like him, and he eventually confesses his guilt. The Telltale Head gives us yet another look into Bart's mind, who is easily influenced by people he looks up to, who aren't always someone he should look up to. When Jimbo invites him to sneak into the cinema, he hesitates since it's essentially stealing, but agrees nonetheless. He goes to the Quickie Mart to buy squishies for his new quote-unquote friends, who, to his surprise, use the opportunity to steal while Apu is distracted. As they gaze into the clouds, the idea of decapitating the statue comes up, and Bart soon decides this is what he has to do. After sawing the head off, he feels instant regret. The "what have I done" line was played perfectly by Nancy Cartwright. He is afraid his parents would find out, and I love the scene where Bart zips open his bag to show Jimbo and his friends what he did, only to immediately close it again when they tell him they beat up the guy who sawed the head off. In the following scenes, Bart becomes more and more scared and trapped with guilt, and then decides to bury the head in the backyard. But as he's about to bury the head under the soil he's digged up, he decides it's better to admit his guilt. The episode shows that Bart is nothing but a 10-year-old kid who's easily influenced, but he's also got the ability to reflect on his own actions, and eventually makes the morally correct decision. Throughout the entire episode, Homer's a bad role model for his son. While in church, he listens to a football game he bet money on using Bart's Walkman Marge took away from him. He tells him nothing's more important in life than to be popular, and it's okay to do anything besides maybe killing someone to reach that goal. What I really like about this episode is how when Bart reveals the statue's head to his family, Homer realizes he is guilty and does indeed feel guilt. In a later episode, Homer would have laughed at Bart, ignored everything entirely, run away from his guilt, or tried to hide it. Instead, Homer protects Bart from Marge, and because he knows they're in this together, he accompanies him when he's about to turn himself in, and even tells Bart he'd take the entire blame when the angry mob tries to kill them. The Telltale Head is yet another amazing episode about the father and son relationship between Homer and Bart, and I'd recommend it for that alone. But that's not all this episode has to offer. It also has some fantastic jokes and other moments. It starts out in a very unconventional way. We see Homer and Bart walking through Springfield at night to return the statue's head. They then get followed by an angry mob that's out to kill them, and then in a desperate attempt at self-defense, Bart tries to talk to the mob and explain them why he did it. What follows is a jump back in time to tell the entire story. There's a great fourth wall break here where he's asked how long it would take to tell the story, and Bart tells them the exact length of the episode. I also think the opening scene is beautiful. I love the lighting and the shadows, and the angry mob with pitchforks and torches is done very well. Until watching this episode again, I never even noticed Homer's little "Lazar who" line when the football commentator compares a comeback in the game to Lazarus' return from the dead. I find it hilarious how the Sunday school teacher is overwhelmed with the kids' silly questions about heaven, and when she's completely exhausted, she asks them whether a little blind faith would be too much to ask for. Another amazing detail I never even noticed before, maybe also because I'm pretty sure I've only ever watched the episode in German until just now, is how Reverend Lovejoy's lip sync matches with the voices on Homer's radio. Bart's attempts at fitting in with the rowdies go so far that he even imitates Jimbo's tiniest behaviors. He stretches out his feet in the cinema seat the same way he does, which is a wonderful visual detail that adds to the storytelling. It's also hilarious how much Bart seems to know about Jebediah Springfield, even though he never pays attention in class. I suppose this is a joke about local patriotism, since virtually everyone in town is not just shocked about the news, but emotionally affected and maybe even depressed. Some break out in tears, like the radio host and Moe. I love the scene where Bart sneaks out at night to saw off the head, which is followed with instant regret. The scene where he drops his bag with the head inside in the kitchen and it makes a loud clang sound is pretty funny, and I think it's hilarious how Krusty the Clown asks his viewers for information on whoever destroyed the statue and tells them to turn them in, even if it's their sibling or their parent. And if they did, they'd get a slide whistle as a reward. And by the way, this is also the first time in the show we see Sideshow Bob, although he doesn't have his iconic hairstyle yet. I wouldn't call the ending sweet, but there are some great lines here, like Krusty's "I don't feel like killing anymore," to which Mrs. Krabappel, Bart's very own teacher, agrees "neither do I." And Mr. Burns admits his love for Smithers, to which he replies the feeling's more than mutual, in what's the first time ever his love for his boss is hinted at. One final thing I'd like to point out is the episode's title. Sure, it's a reference to Edgar Allan Poe's The Telltale Heart, but it also makes sense because the episode starts with the final scene and Bart tells a tale about how and why he cut the head off. The Telltale Head is an amazing episode from start to finish. I love the way Bart and Homer act and bond together. It is consistently funny and also visually very appealing with some beautiful night sequences. It's my second favorite episode so far, only behind Moaning Lisa. Life on the Fast Lane, written by John Swartzwelder, directed by David Silverman, original air date March 18th, 1990. Homer gets Marge a bowling ball that has his own name engraved on it for her birthday. Out of spite, she decides to use it and meets a professional bowling player called Jacques, who starts giving her lessons and falls in love with her. Because of Marge's attraction to Jacques, her marriage with Homer starts to crumble, and she has to decide who she loves more. This episode is first and foremost a story about Marge and Homer's relationship issues. It starts with Lisa and Bart lovingly preparing Marge's birthday breakfast, while Homer forgot her birthday entirely and sets out to buy her a present. On the phone, Patty and Selma tell Marge he only buys things for himself, and they are right. He comes home with a bowling ball, even though Marge has never bowled in her entire life. The holes are modeled after his fingers, it has his name on it, and he never intended for her to use it. Marge is not only disappointed, but enraged. Not only has her husband forgot her birthday, but bought her something he wanted only to himself. It goes so far that she refuses to talk to Homer for the entire evening, and when she goes to bed, she only says that she'll use it herself and thanks him for the present. Julie Kavanagh's acting is great here. Marge's disappointment and spite is all too real, and it's honestly horrible to see how Homer angrily accuses her of not even knowing how to bowl. Moments like these must make Marge wonder why she even loves this guy, and what makes it even worse is that a day later she meets this attractive guy who openly expresses his love for her, but also acts like somewhat of a predator and hits on her, which at first makes her extremely uncomfortable. Just like Cowboy Bob, Jacques is voiced by Albert Brooks in what's probably the greatest performance on the show so far. This little theme music that plays whenever he appears or tries to get closer to Marge makes the Jacques scenes even better. I love when characters on a show have a short jingle or sting that is associated with them. They also did this later with Sideshow Bob. The little montage scene in Barney's Bowlerama where Jacques gives her bowling lessons and tries to touch her whenever possible is especially well done, and it shows how easily Marge is seduced by Jacques. She then instantly agrees to his invitations to brunch and later to his own flat. In the meantime, Homer has to take care of the kids, and he is clearly lost without his wife. She made him a to-do list, and he even has to look up that after eating he should probably clean up. Throughout the episode, he is deeply saddened because of Marge spending time with Jacques and being obviously attracted to him. He spends time looking at her bowling glove that Jacques got her, which makes him too sad to do anything. When Bart asks him to play baseball, he is quickly knocked out, and after Bart complains that he didn't even say ouch, he adds an ouch that shows how empty he is inside. Because he is incredibly scared his wife will leave him, he later compliments her for the way she makes PB&J sandwiches, saying no one can do it like her, and he truly appreciates her for it. Marge does not know how to respond to that, and I'd assume it's one of the first times ever Homer tries to tell her he loves her. This might not seem to be the most romantic compliment, but knowing Homer, the sandwiches mean an awful lot to him, and Marge realizes this. The farewell that follows must be painful to both sides. Later at work, Homer refuses to eat the sandwich even though he's starving, because it's the only thing he's got left that's from her. What follows is a scene where Marge is about to drive to Jacques' apartment, but is undecided whether she wants to go there or to the power plant. Eventually, she walks into the power plant to visit Homer, and the two of them walk out to their car. Everyone applauds them, and Homer proudly announces he won't be back for the next 10 minutes. Yeah, but it's done very respectfully, it's a fantastic ending. The most impressive scene from Life on the Fast Lane is Marge's dream about a date with Jacques. After he asks her to meet him at his flat, she is knocked unconscious and dreams of this beautiful scene with a wonderfully surreal color scheme. The two of them wear a dress and a suit, they dance with bowling pins in the background. Marge is impressed by his bowling trophies, which are revealed to be trophies for love-making. It's an amazing scene, in my opinion it's the most impressive bit of animation out of every episode I've reviewed so far. What I also enjoy is how Lisa correctly analyzes Marge's overcompensation and lives through the stages a child goes through when their parents don't love each other anymore, while Bart is cheerful and wonders how he could exploit the situation, until later when he lives through the same exact cycle Lisa's already going through. Just like Moaning Lisa, Life on the Fast Lane isn't exactly the funniest episode, though it has its moments. Bart gets Marge this awful bottle of perfume and is naive enough to believe her lies where she doesn't put it on. I like how the singers in the restaurant wish a happy birthday to Miss Homer Simpson, though I thought it was Patty and Selma who booked the table. Homer's "does time always drag like this" is great, and I like the scene of him being knocked out by a baseball, and the advice that he gave Bart is great too. Life on the Fast Lane is one of the best episodes so far. It's a wonderful story about Marge and Homer's relationship. In fact, it might be one of the best ones of its kind in the entire series. There are many episodes where their feelings for each other are questioned, but in the end, they realize that, despite everything, they love each other, but not many do it as well as this one. It's very real, and Lisa's and Bart's struggles because of their relationship not working are yet another detail that prove The Simpsons is not just a cartoon, but a show about real people and real life. To top it off, it features a great one-off character with an amazing performance by Albert Brooks, who is amazing at improvising and creates jokes on the fly. I'm not kidding, he improvised lines for Jacques for an hour, and some of the highlights are on the DVD bonus material. It's fantastic. It's one of my favorites so far. I'll rank it in third place for now because I found that Telltale had a little more entertaining, but I can see the argument for ranking this episode higher. They are very close. Homer's Night Out, written by John Vitti, directed by Rich Moore, original air date March 25th, 1990. With his new spy camera, Bart takes a picture of Homer and a belly dancer known as Princess Cashmere at a bachelor party. Bart gives the picture to a couple of his friends, and soon everyone in town has seen it. Marge is furious and kicks Homer out of the house, and eventually she reveals what she's most disappointed about is how Homer's a bad role model for Bart, and commands him to introduce Princess Cashmere to his son to show him that women are human beings too, and worthy of respect. I find this episode's premise incredibly strange. Why would a picture of a fat, middle-aged man next to a dancer be so interesting for the kids at elementary school? And why would everyone in town want to have a copy of the picture? I get why people like Moe, who knows Homer, or Mr. Burns, who is his boss and asks him for advice, would have it, but why does it become so popular? Why is Apu pinned behind the checkout at the Quickie Mart? The episode then turns into yet another episode where Marge's and Homer's marriage is at risk. It's not like we've already seen that one episode ago, but this time it's Homer's fault. But even though this is nothing new at this point, the episode shows yet again how much Marge means to Homer and how much he depends on her, though I think Life on the Fast Lane did that much more successfully. Once Homer and Marge eventually talk to each other, Homer is as awkward as ever when he shows her how he drinks milk out of a glass, not directly out of the box, and then Marge tells him to show Bart how women aren't objects. I like that this goes horribly wrong. Him and Homer visit every strip club and burlesque house in town to inquire whether she's there or not, and Bart always tries his best to peek inside and is always very excited because of what he gets to see. When they finally find Princess Cashmere, Homer gets her to talk about herself a little, but eventually Homer gets recognized and becomes the star of the show since he's apparently the greatest womanizer in town. Bart encourages him and yells, "Way to go." I don't think the picture would make Bart objectify women, but Marge's idea helps him see things that might. What follows is that Homer starts this talk about how we should all respect women. They might be those sexy, curvy creatures that make us go wild, but they also are mothers and sisters and daughters. Everyone breaks out in tears and Marge forgives him. I think this ending is ridiculous. Homer delivers a message as simple as respect women in the worst way imaginable, and suddenly all is well again. In several videos I've watched on YouTube, people criticize they don't see how there's anything wrong with the picture. It's just Homer dancing next to a woman. This I don't agree with. It's probably all you could do on TV back in 1990, and Marge's reaction is very understandable considering there's a picture going around of her drunk husband sliding dollar bills into a half-naked woman's panties. But the whole premise of the episode is not very believable and the ending is terrible. What also doesn't help is that the episode is not very funny. I like the scene with Bart at the Rusty Barnacle. The cold pet rat is the only joke I remembered from this episode. My favorite part of Homer deciding to start working out at several different points in time is the "don't strain yourself, good idea" interaction. The biggest laugh I got is from the scene at Moe's bar, where Homer talks about the picture, and Moe asks, "What, this one?" pointing to the picture he pinned on his wall. Barney calling Marge to tell her to turn the lights off is great too, and I like Mr. Burns' rant at Homer, 50% of our power is used by women, followed by him seeking advice on how to appeal to women, and I love the animation of him enthusiastically nodding his head. Another detail I like is how much Eugene and his father are disgusted at the bachelor party. Although the episode has some decent moments and details, none of them stand out as particularly funny or memorable. The saving grace of the episode is honestly how Lisa and Bart suffer from their father being gone, and how they lovingly welcome him once he finally returns. It's much more subtle than the stages of grief in the previous episode, and it works really well. As you might be able to tell, Homer's Night Out is my least favourite episode so far. I might have sounded extremely negative, so just know that this episode is much better than most of what the show has done in the past 20 years or so, but we'll talk about that once we get there. For now, this episode remains at the bottom of my list. The Crepes of Wrath, written by George Meyer, Sam Simon, John Swartzwelder and John Vitti, directed by Wes Archer and Milton Gray, original air date April 15th, 1990. Homer and Skinner both have their reasons to be angry at Bart and decide to send him on an exchange program to France. His hosts there are two winemakers, César and Hugolin, who are embodiments of the stereotypical Frenchman that make him work all day long, sleep on the floor, and starve him. In the meantime, the Simpsons welcome an Albanian boy called Adil, who turns out to be a spy who tries to steal secret information on the Springfield power plant. In the beginning of the episode, Homer stumbles over Bart's skateboard and falls down the stairs in a hilariously animated scene where the stairs are way too long, but have the perfect length for the scene to be comedic gold. He lands on his back and is unable to get back up like a turtle, and a Krusty the Clown toy next to him keeps repeating the same line for hours, which makes him go crazy. The next day at school, Agnes Skinner is introduced to the show, who keeps calling her son Spanky, much to the amusement of the children. Skinner tries his best to not lose the kids' respect for him, and he has some amazing facial expressions in this scene. I especially love the distorted drawing of Spanky in the peephole of the Simpsons door. In the meantime, Homer lies on the couch all day and constantly rings a bell to call Marge and asks her to serve him. This makes Homer extremely dislikable, but when Skinner arrives, he plays the victim who's terrorized by Bart. I love the joke where Homer confuses Albanians with albinos, and the scene where Skinner and Homer jump up to celebrate when Bart agrees to go to France is hilarious. Not only because of how enthusiastic they are, but also because Homer is suddenly able to jump up even though up to this point he was apparently unable to stand. The Crepes of Wrath is the first time in the show we see a member of the family go to another country, and as usual on the show, it turns out to be a horrible experience. After Bart gets to experience the beauty of France and travels through several amazing references to paintings such as Bassin aux Nymphéas by Monet, Chambre d'Oubli au Corbeau by Van Gogh, Le Rêve by Rousseau, and Déjeuner sur l'herbe by Manet, he eventually finds himself at Chateau Maison, a sleazy farmhouse where his hosts steal his baggage and make him work for them. He was super excited to go on the trip, but as soon as he gets there, he wants to go back home. Reading the letter from Marge while he has to sleep on the floor makes him cry, and the state he's in is truly miserable. Starved and worked to death, his clothes all dirty. In the meantime, Adil is an absolute poster child. He is very respectful and kind to everyone, always ready to help. To Homer, he is the child he had always wanted. However, he's a communist spy. Yes, when this episode was made, the socialist bloc was still a thing. Whenever a communist character appears on a US-American TV show, it usually goes very wrong, but Adil is treated very respectfully by the writers. There's a scene where he has a discussion with Lisa about the oppression of the working class in the States, where Lisa argues the United States is a country where people can live freely. There are some great jokes about the apparent freedom of choice under capitalism as demonstrated with different donut flavors. Skinner's speech, where he introduces Adil to the children at school, is a great satire on the way US American people see other countries that, in their eyes, are backwards. It's also important to note that Adil's surname is Hoxha, after former Albanian leader Enver Hoxha. I hope I said that right. It's actually horrible how much Homer seems to love Adil, while it's so hard for him to say he loves Bart. In her letter to Bart, Marge tells him that just the day before, Homer said he loves him, which is really sad. It's hilarious, however, how blind Homer is once Adil starts to spy. He shows him around the power plant like it's nothing, gives him access to top secret devices and blueprints. It's also really funny how Homer has no idea about the power plant's equipment and has to ask Lenny, who sends him to where a vending machine or something is. At one point, Bart's hosts contaminate their wine with antifreeze and use Bart to test whether it blinds people or not, and the animation where he follows César's hand with his eyes is hilarious. They then send him to buy more antifreeze, where Bart meets a gendarme and tells him in his newly acquired French about his conditions, and the officer is shocked at antifreeze in wine, which is a serious crime. The Chateau Maison is closed, Bart is celebrated as a hero, while Adil is captured by the FBI and sent home to Albania in exchange for a US-American spy captured there. The two of them have met each other before, which is another great joke. And Homer still promises him to send him the secret plans he had asked for. The souvenirs Bart brings home from France are some funny details as well, like the guillotine he gives Lisa. I've already mentioned some of the amazing visuals, like the references to several famous French paintings, and some of the incredibly funny drawings, but I want to give another shoutouts to some of the lighting in this episode. The shots at nighttime are truly beautiful, including the corner Bart has to sleep in, and the scene where Homer wishes Ideal a good night. The Crepes of Wrath is a great episode in so many aspects. It features new and unique locations, points fun at other cultures, has some great laughs throughout, and amazing visuals. I love how they always cut back and forth between two scenes that are the exact opposite of each other. For example, Bart is forced to sleep on the floor because he can't even use the hay that's laid out there since it's already occupied by their donkey. And then we see Ideal, who can sleep in Bart's bed and is wished a good night by Homer, who treats him like the son he had always wished he had. It's one of the best episodes in this season. I'll rank it below Life on the Fast Lane for now. Krusty Gets Busted, written by Jake Hogan and Wallace Wolodarski, directed by Brad Bird, original air date April 29th, 1990. While Homer is at the Quickie Mart to buy ice cream, he witnesses a masked clown resembling Krusty committing armed robbery. Krusty is then arrested and sentenced to jail. But Bart believes he was framed, and together with Lisa, he searches for proof for his innocence. Eventually, he identifies Krusty's sidekick Sideshow Bob as the real culprit. Remember my review of Moaning Lisa when I said there's only one other episode that I can think of that can possibly beat it? First things first, it's hilarious from start to finish. Whenever I watch these episodes, I take some notes of my favorite moments and usually list the funniest jokes. But in Krusty Gets Busted, there are just way too many of them. Not only is the writing amazing, but the amount of visual gags and hilarious drawings and animation is outstanding. So just to list my favorites, I love with how much enthusiasm the kids in Krusty's audience say they kill themselves if Krusty gets taken off the air. Bob's comments on the slide whistle are great, and the animation of him falling out of the cannon is hilarious, but far from the funniest animation in the episode. The sad clowns at the interrogation are great, and it's really funny how Homer struggles to point at the right one because of how much he has to laugh himself. Speaking of Homer, his reaction to having missed the slideshow is very fitting, and it's very in character how he misspells the word guilty to Marge. The intro to the Krusty the Clown show that was shown in the beginning of the episode is repeated in the beginning of the second act, except this time it turns into him being locked up behind bars and a lurid headline, Krusty Gets Busted. The heart attack scene is hilarious from start to finish. Not only is the heart attack itself outstanding, but I also love everything leading up to it, like Krusty's expression when he rubs his hands, and it's amazing how even serious news anchor Kent Brotman has to laugh at the video. The video of Krusty knocking out Bob after having had a pie thrown into his face is comedic gold too, since it's so unexpected and out of character, or rather the role he plays on the show. The expression the masked Bob makes on the tape as Homer steps on his foot is incredible. I like how Krusty enthusiastically pleads guilty, only to correct himself. The CCTV footage of Homer jumping into the stack of potato crisps is especially noteworthy. The buy him and burn him line is very memorable, and I love the lawyer's reaction. This happens to me every time when he loses the trial. Maybe this guy was some kind of role model for Lionel Hutz. I don't remember seeing him again in a later episode. A recurring gag throughout the entire episode is that after being robbed, Apu turns into a weapon fanatic who later threatens to shoot Lisa and Bart just for touching a magazine without buying it. Sideshow Bob's acting is incredible from start to finish. I especially love the facial expression he makes once he finishes reading a chapter from The Man in the Iron Mask, and his reaction to Bart reminding him of being shot out of a cannon. The police's reaction to Sideshow Bob being revealed as the true robber is funny too, and I love the sounds Krusty's shoes make once he leaves the police station. Even though Sideshow Bob was already shown in the Telltale Head, his design was reworked for this episode where he was fully introduced. He is in many ways the opposite of Krusty, who represents low culture, while he himself represents high culture and turns the Krusty the Clown show into a sophisticated program that teaches kids about culture, morals, philosophy, etc. Watching this episode again, I've noticed tiny details, such as Krusty asking his audience who do they love, while Bob asks them whom do they love. I actually find it kind of sad to imagine that after Bob had been arrested, the show returned back to normal, even though the children were clearly invested in and excited by Bob's show. Bob was voiced by Kelsey Grammer, who has returned for every episode Bob's in, and who's one of the greatest guest stars in the history of the show. Sideshow Bob is a great character in concept, but it's Grammer's voice what really makes the character. It adds so much. This is the greatest performance by any voice actor in this season. I also like how Lisa and Bart work together. Although their investigation is quite short and predictable, it's very cute to see though how when Bart tries to convince Lisa to help him, she makes him admit she's smarter than him and he needs her to prove Krusty's innocence. As already mentioned, the animation in this episode is incredible. Some cartoons are so good that the drawings alone can make me laugh out loud. One very good example is the 1951 Looney Tunes cartoon Rabbit Fire. Krusty Gets Busted is another outstanding example. Be it Krusty's heart attack, Sideshow Bob's expressions, Homer jumping into the potato crisps, and so much more that I haven't even mentioned, this episode is filled to the brink with hilarious drawings and acting. It was directed by Brad Bird, who later wrote and directed Academy Award-winning feature films such as The Incredibles and Ratatouille, and he did a stellar job with this episode. The only shot that in my opinion looks weird is Homer's reaction to Bob's gun. And of course, as is common in season 1, it has a lot of animation goofs and wrong coloring, such as a White Lou and Judge Snyder, who in this episode was still called Judge Moulton. Krusty Gets Busted remains one of the best Sideshow Bob episodes to this day. It is hilarious from start to finish, both in writing and animation, and it features an excellent performance by Kelsey Grammer. I haven't rewatched Some Enchanted Evening yet, but from what I remember, that episode is fairly mediocre, so I'm gonna say that Krusty Gets Busted is without a doubt my favorite episode from season 1, I can only recommend it. Some Enchanted Evening, written by Matt Groening and Sam Simon, directed by David Silverman and Kent Butterworth, original air date May 13th, 1990. Homer takes out Marge on a date, and the kids are left at home with a babysitter called Mrs. Botts, who turns out to be the infamous babysitter burglar, who then captures the children and starts stealing the Simpsons' valuables. Eventually they capture her, but Homer and Marge release her, not knowing who she is. Some Enchanted Evening was originally intended to be the pilot episode of the show. It's obvious that its main purpose was to introduce the characters. It was the first episode that returned from South Korea, but the initial reaction to it was extremely negative. The style was cartoony and not as realistic as it was meant to be. After the first screening at Gracie Films, James L. Brooks called it shit, and the producers considered abandoning the show entirely had Bart the Genius turned out similarly. According to director David Silverman, about 70% of the episode had to be redone. It was moved to the end of the season, and the premiere of the show was delayed by several months. Watching the episode, you can clearly tell the old parts that remained in the final product. A lot of the animation looks too weird, in some cases a little too good for the show. Like when Mrs. Bart tells Bart to do what she says, she moves way too much and has way too many in-between frames that doesn't fit the style of the show. Other bits of animation I've noticed that look weird are Bart yelling at Mrs. Bart that they know who she is, and her leaving the house and talking to Homer at the end. On the other hand, this episode also has some truly fantastic animation and visual direction. I love the scene where Marge angrily waits for Homer to come home, she yells at the kids like a wild animal, and she gets more and more enraged as time goes on. The close-up shot of Moe is disgusting, but it does its job since it's supposed to show that everyone at Moe's bar is, according to Moe, a disgusting pig. Homer's expressions when he's on the phone are priceless, him without a beard is incredibly cursed, and him and Marge dancing is another excellent example for the quality of the show in the first seasons. I also enjoy how Lisa and Bart get more and more anxious as they watch the TV report and freak out once Mrs. Bart shows up with a rope to capture them. The scene in the basement where she tries to find Bart is phenomenal too, especially with the beautiful lighting. I also love Maggie's escape scene and how Lisa and Bart try to catch her attention. The episode does its job well, which is introduce the characters. Unfortunately, it doesn't really matter, since it's now the 13th episode and not the first one. But still, we get introduced to Marge's and Homer's relationship issues, but also learn that, despite everything, they still love each other. And Bart, Lisa and Maggie, but especially Bart, are bratty little children that babysitters are afraid of. We already learn a lot about Bart's character, not so much about Lisa though. I guess that's what Moaning Lisa is for. What I like about Lisa in this one, however, is, again, her enthusiasm for the little elves, which she still watches in excitement even though she'd already seen it countless times, while Bart ruins the fun for her. The episode works and is decently entertaining, but unfortunately it's not very funny. I like how when Dr. Marvin Monroe tells Marge on the phone that, I quote, "Your husband sees you as nothing," Marge says, "Well, okay, thank you," and almost hangs up. It's funny how Homer's colleagues laugh at him after Marge leaked Homer's real name. I also like the Garçon's commentary on the dead lobster that Homer wanted to choose. Homer's line, "I suppose my job here is done," after the successful evening at the hotel, and the caption that says, "Homer Simpson, local boob." There are some other funny moments, but it's really far from the funniest episode. Some Enchanted Evening is better than I remember it being, but since it's mainly an obvious pilot episode that didn't get to fulfill its purpose and doesn't really do much beyond that, it fails in comparison to some of the true highlights of the season, and it was probably for the better that Simpsons Roasting on an Open Fire replaced it as the first episode of the show. Season 1 is strange, because the show has not reached its peak yet, it's really unorganized, the animation is not very clean, a lot of the characters look weird, but it's honestly amazing despite of its shortcomings. Not only is it incredibly charming, but it really took me by surprise how touching some of the episodes are, and how the characters act like real people with real emotions. In fact, in Season 1, The Simpsons might be the most human they've ever been. Homer is a father who tries his best to support his family and loves his wife, Lisa suffers from depression, Bart is badly influenced by other kids at school and tries to fit in. These characters are very complex and, despite all of their faults, lovable. And that's always been the main focus for the writers, but on top of all that, they are also incredibly funny. It's not like later episodes where these wonderful characters are reduced to simple joke characters that are constantly ridiculed, embarrassed, disrespected, or made to do and say horrible things only to get a laugh from the viewers. Overall, the season is very funny. Some episodes are funnier than others, but basically every episode has at least one or two incredibly memorable and quotable lines or moments. The writers didn't know what this show would eventually turn into, but what they already managed to achieve in this season is truly outstanding. Visually, it might take a while to get used to if you're coming from the later episodes, and yes, the backgrounds and characters look very rough, but the amount of high quality animation in this season really surprised me. Many episodes have unbelievably creative and imaginative sequences, such as dreams that are beautifully surreal and over the top. Much of the character animation is hilarious, such as Krusty's and Sideshow Bob's, or simply impressively beautiful, such as Marge's and Homer's dance. I love the wide variety of stories. We have plots focused on a character's inner struggles, such as Moaning Lisa and the Telltale Head. Episodes about the family, like Simpsons roasting on an open fire and There's No Disgrace Like Home. It has episodes that explore new and unique locations, such as The Call of the Simpsons and the Crepes of Wrath. And Krusty Gets Busted is an episode where secondary characters play a special role. Nothing gets old, there's always a fresh idea in every episode. Rewatching this season made me realize again what the qualities of the show are. It's a comedic show that is just absurd and over the top enough to be insanely funny, while still remaining realistic and emotional. It's animated, sure, but it does not feature cartoon characters. It's a show about real people that are both caricatures, but also relatable. It's satirical and full of cultural references, but it's also got amazing situational comedy and hilarious dialogues, topped off with extremely funny animation. It's no wonder why The Simpsons was such a hit when it premiered. It was so fresh and different. Up until this point, the only animation on TV was specifically aimed at children, kinda like Lisa's favorite show, The Happy Little Elves. But The Simpsons made it clear from the beginning that it is something special. A show for adults that can be enjoyed by children and that excels on so many different layers. It is emotional and straight from the heart. It makes every kind of joke imaginable. And besides the obvious jokes, it's got hidden details that reward those who look for them. Had The Simpsons been cancelled after just one season, it would still be considered an absolute classic. An incredible collection of 13 episodes about a dysfunctional, but lovable and relatable everyday family. I'm not a huge fan of reviews that praise something for being revolutionary and ahead of its time, but it is important to note that without The Simpsons, adult animation simply would not exist. This was a new kind of program that almost got cancelled before it even went on the air. No one expected it to do well, but today the market is flooded with shows following its footsteps. You know, Futurama, King of the Hill, Family Guy, South Park, you name them. Many of them shouldn't be watched by children, or anyone. We take shows like these for granted, but they wouldn't be a thing had it not been for this set of 13 strangely unique episodes that were so ahead of their time. Here's my ranking of all the episodes in this season. Krusty Gets Busted and Moaning Lisa are my clear favorites. Some episodes aren't as great, but even though I did criticize Homer's Night Out quite a bit, I want to say that all episodes in this season are at least okay and memorable, each one for its own unique reasons. I'd like to give every season a score, and maybe even create a graph to document the quality of the show over time. I've originally wanted to give this season a 7.5 out of 10, since it's really good, but not nearly as great as the peak of the show. However, considering how funny and touching it is, and how much the animation stands out, I'm going to award it a very solid 8 out of 10. But the show managed to reach highs way beyond this first season. Starting with season 2 already, it was much more refined and clean, and soon after, in seasons 3 and 4, it reached its peak that made it stand out as possibly the greatest TV series of all time. But we'll look into that next time when we review season 2, at one point, eventually. I don't know how long that'll take though. Heck, I don't even know how long it'll take me to edit this video. If you knew my channel before, you might have noticed that this video is a little different from the content I usually make. It's not a short cartoon, neither is it in German. I haven't made many animations in the past couple of years because of how long they take to make, and the cartoons I really want to make are way too ambitious for me to produce on my own. But I love making videos in general, and this is my channel and I can upload whatever the hell I want. So now I review The Simpsons, and who knows what my next video is going to be. Also, I figured it's probably better to change the language of my videos to English. I will still make animations like I used to. There's the inevitable third part of Herbert the Enter that will be made at some point, and that will be in German. And also there's another video that I've started working on way back in 2015 that I have since revisited every couple of years. It's far from finished, but I'd like to get it out at some point, though I don't know when that'll be. So those two videos will still be in German, but other future animations should be in English. Who knows though, maybe this will be a bilingual channel and I'll upload more videos in German. It might even become multilingual, I don't know. My point is, expect a wider range of different kinds of videos. No matter what I upload though, my videos should all have something to do with cartoons, but I'll only make videos I really want to make. So that's the new direction of this channel. It was cartoons, now it's whatever I feel like. I hope this doesn't mean that I'll lose subscribers again, because that's what happened with every single one of my uploads in the last couple of years. I'd appreciate it a lot if you leave a like or a comment, or maybe even subscribe to my channel. I'd be very happy to receive feedback for future videos like this. I know I might have repeated myself a lot, because I wrote the reviews for every episode directly after watching the episode, and it took me it took me about 2 weeks to get done with the season, so I didn't always remember what I already said in a previous review. I'm also considering looking at other animated series as well at some point. Futurama would be an obvious choice, but there are some others I have in mind that I might look into. If you clicked on this video because you had no idea who I am and simply wanted a review of The Simpsons Season 1, please stay tuned for my review of Season 2. And maybe you'll even stay until Season 5, or 10, or 30. I'd really appreciate the support. If you speak German, please also consider checking out the gaming channel I'm part of, Girafari Gaming. Thank you so much for watching, especially for watching until this point if you got here, and take care. I'll see you in the next one.